Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live a life of faith and confidence alongside someone who, deep down, is cheating on you? I am Sarah Williams. I am 66 years old, and I can assure you that living with this constant doubt is one of the most painful experiences that a woman can face. My marriage seemed perfect for everyone around me, but the reality was quite different. I believed I was living the dream of any Christian woman, a dedicated husband, a blessed family, and of course, a solid faith that united us. But what I didn't know is that behind the words of love and prayers, there was something dark that I would never imagine. Imagine being there, holding hands, reading the Bible together, believing that it is building something sacred, while he was actually cheating on me. It seems impossible, isn't it? But it happened to me. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to see the pain in front of me. Have you ever been through something have you ever had that feeling something was being hidden, but did you decide to close your eyes for love, by faith, or perhaps even for fear to face the truth? Stay with me until the end, because what you will find out now can surprise you. It is not easy to talk about it, but if you have already felt betrayed or abandoned, or even judged by something you could not control, I invite you to keep listening. The journey I lived may be the answer to many questions you have inside you. Love, pain, loss, and reconstruction of a broken faith. All this is part of my story. And now, you'll understand what happened when I finally decided to look at the truth that was right before me. I am a mother, grandmother, and for many years I was a dedicated wife. I grew up in a Christian family where marriage was seen as a sacred pact. From an early age, I learned that the love between husband and wife should be immense, firm, and unshakable, reflecting Christ's own love for his church. For me, marriage has always been a journey of companionship, mutual respect, and unconditional support. I believed that, even in the face of the difficulties that arise over time, faith would always guide us to overcome any obstacle. What I never imagined, however, was that the greatest difficulty of my life would be something that came from inside my own home. I was 18 when we met. He was all I expected in a man, kind, attentive, and with a solid faith that attracted me. When we got married, everything seemed perfect. I surrendered to the marriage of body and soul, without reserve, without fear of risking. I thought I had found my half, that person I could share not only the good times, but also the difficulties of life. And for many years, that's exactly what I lived. But as we all know, life is not always what we expect. The first sign that something was wrong appeared discreetly, almost imperceptible. Small lies, details that he tried to hide, gestures of inattention. I clung to my faith, believing that this was just a difficult phase we would go through together. After all, marriage was a pact, and I was not willing to give up easily. But over time, I began to realize that he was not as committed as me. He sometimes seemed distant, oblivious to what was happening around us. And I wondered, am I imagining things? Am I being too sensitive? And then, the day came when I could no longer ignore the signs. I was at home, alone, reading the Bible as it always did, and he got a smile on his face, but something in his gaze made me realize that he was hiding something. I didn't know exactly what it was, but that feeling of something being hidden was present. Deep down, I knew my intuition was telling me the truth. Even so, I tried to push the fear away, trying to keep calm, seeking strength in my faith, as I always did. But I was starting to see the truth that was being hidden from me. When I finally found the evidence of betrayal, it was as if the floor was disappeared under my feet. My husband, the man I shared my life with, was cheating on me. Worse, this happened while we together read the Holy Scriptures. I could barely believe what I was seeing. The pain was overwhelming, a mixture of disappointment, anger, and a deep fear of what would come ahead. How could this happen? How could someone who shared your life with you do this? At that moment, my faith was put to the test in a way that I never imagined. The questions began to come up without stopping. Why do I do it wrong? How can I forgive such a betrayal? I knew the Bible talked about forgiveness, but the pain it felt seemed impossible to overcome. How did someone who already loved, who believed in the sacred pact of marriage, could find strength to forgive something like this? What I didn't know at the time, and that I only understood later, is that the true transformation was not coming to try to change the other, but to understand my own journey, my choices, and especially what I really needed to move on. The pain was great, but it also showed me something important. Faith is not about the perfection of the other, but about how we can get up after we were broken. The pain I felt at that moment made me question everything I believed, everything I had lived so far. How can one be able to hide such a devastating truth, especially when sharing your life with you before God? That emptiness in the chest was not just betrayal. It was the feeling of being deceived by someone I deeply trusted. At that moment, I found myself completely lost, not knowing where to start rebuilding my life. Faith, which has always been my pillar, began to look away. And more than ever, I asked myself, how can I move on? What do I do with this pain? But like every process of transformation, it was at this point of total darkness that I began to understand that my strength would not come to try to force a change in it, but to make choices for myself. I needed to heal. I needed to understand that the pain, though intense, would not be my end. It would be my motivation for transformation, for the renewal of my faith and my life. I realized that even broken, I could rebuild my journey, but this time, more true and strong than ever. And that's why I'm here, sharing my story with you. Because when talking about everything I lived, you may see yourself on my journey. You may also have faced difficult situations that have marked you and left you insecure about your faith, your choices, and who you are. If this subject makes sense to you, if you are going through something similar, share in the comments what has touched you here. It is through these exchanges that we begin to realize that we are not alone. And if you are enjoying this content and feels that it is helping you in some way, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. This helps me continue bringing stories like mine, which can serve as a guide and support for women like you who seek strength, healing, and transformation. Your registration makes all the difference for the message to get even further and tap other women who, like me, are looking for answers and reconstruction. But the most important thing for you to know is this: no matter what you've been through, faith can be renewed. Even in the most difficult situations, there's always a way forward, a path of healing that over time brings us peace. And that's exactly what I learned, and I'll tell you how this journey led to the next chapter of my life. We met when I was only 18, and he appeared in my life like a dream. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to be the answer to all my prayers. When we first saw ourselves, there was an almost magical feeling in the air. Everything in him seemed perfect, as if it were the man I had expected all my life. Our faith, shared from the beginning, has become the foundation of everything we build together. I believed that God was blessing us, that union was part of the divine plan. At that time, I really thought I had found my safe haven. The relationship seemed simple and natural, as if the universe had conspired to unite us. Faith guided us, and I saw it as a blessing, a sign that everything we build would have a solid and lasting basis. He also seemed to believe it. Together we began to dream about the life we would have, the children we would raise, and the family we would build. I never doubted that we were on the right track. How could you? Our spiritual connection was strong, and I felt that the love we shared was immune to the difficulties the world could bring us. But as life has taught me, things are rarely what seem at first glance. He believed that our marriage would be eternal. After all, we were together for God in His name, and He would not abandon us. He thought that the evidence and tribulations that arose would only be small tests that we would face together with faith and love. I never imagined that while I gave myself body and soul to that man, he would be moving away from me in a way that I couldn't realize. At first it was difficult to see any sign. Everything looked well as it should be, but over time, a strange feeling began to settle inside me, like a soft but constant whisper, saying that something was not right. It was not something I could play or see directly, but it was there, as if the balance of what I believed was subtly being altered. And despite my confidence in God, this little hole of uncertainty began to grow. I wondered, is it me who am imagining this? Is I'm being exaggerated? I knew he loved me. He always said that. He never openly demonstrated that something was wrong, but there were small changes, as if he were slowly distancing himself, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I started wondering if it was something he was hiding, or if he was in my mind. I didn't want to believe that the man I saw as my companion, the man I made so many plans with, could be cheating on me. No, it made no sense. He was the person I prayed with every night. He was the one I asked for protection, blessings, and strength to face life. How could this happen within the home we built ourselves? But this feeling of something strange began to become stronger, like a weight in the chest. As the days passed, I realized that I was no longer living that full life I had imagined. There was something out of place, something that could no longer be ignored. In fact, what I felt in my soul was that, as much as we tried, our faith no longer kept us connected in the same way. What I did not know at that time is that life's biggest challenges do not come with great shouts or clear signs, but they come slowly, like a shadow, until they are impossible to ignore. Now, over time, I realize that the relationship has become something I could no longer control. But even so, I was still looking for answers. I still hoped that it was just a phase, a period of difficulties. I didn't want to see the truth, and more than that, I didn't know how to deal with it. How could something so deep be broken? And more importantly, how could I handle it without losing my faith? And it was precisely there, when everything seemed to crumble around me, that I began to realize something deep and true. True strength was not trying to change the other, but to understand what was inside me. The decision on how to deal with pain, transformation, and especially forgiveness was in my hands. But this journey of self, discovery, and acceptance of a difficult truth was just beginning. And with each step, I got closer to the real healing. In the early years of marriage, it seemed that everything was working. Each day it seemed to confirm that our union was growing, that we were building something strong, something that would last forever. I really believed God was in control, that our faith was enough to overcome any challenge. Achava que, com o tempo, nossos laços ficariam cada vez mais sólidos. As a Christian woman, this was the mindset I had, that marriage was a divine mission, and that any adversity was an opportunity to strengthen our commitment. Looking back, I see how I was immersed in this ideal of perfection, a marriage armored against any problem. But, as in all life stories, reality rarely meets our expectations. Gradually, the signs began to appear subtly, as if they wanted to be ignored. I tried not to realize, maybe even fooling myself, because I didn't want things to change. Life was already good, and I believed that God was blessing us. But, even so, there were those little departures, those moments when he seemed distant, disconnected. It was as if something had broken without me being able to understand what was going on. He was not as present as before, and was beginning to disappear in his own words and attitudes. Small lies began to emerge, lies that I initially accepted as if they were simple misunderstandings. He said he was busy at work or that he needed time for him, but a part of me knew there was more than that. I tried to rationalize, try to believe that he was still there, but something inside me told me that something was being hidden, that I was not seeing the whole truth. And it was then that one day I found something that made everything else fit, something that made me question everything. I was at home, organizing some things, when, by chance, I found a message. It was not any message, but a message that should not be there. It was a message that revealed what I already feared, but I didn't want to admit. He was cheating on me. The pain at that moment was unbearable. It was as if the world turned faster and I could no longer follow it. The man I shared dreams and prayers with, the man who was by my side while I read the Bible, now was someone I barely recognized. He was elsewhere with someone else, and I wondered how it could happen without me noticing. At that moment, a storm of feelings took over me. Anger, sadness, unbelief. I felt that my life had been turned inside out, and the confidence I had in it seemed to have disappeared overnight. How could I have been so naive? How could he do this to me while we shared our faith as we prayed together for our future? Every minute of that marriage seemed to be a lie, every smile a facade. I found myself lost, completely disoriented, questioning everything I had believed about love and faithfulness. I knew the pain I was feeling was not just because of the betrayal itself, but for all that was behind her. The pain was deeper than any superficial hurt. She touched the essence of what I believed to be right, what I based my life and my faith. And what scared me even more was that, as much as the pain was intense, The doubt about what would come next was becoming increasingly present. The question that was on my mind was, so now, what should we do? How can we deal with this and move forward? The answers did not come easily, but it was from this moment of rupture that I began to see, for the first time, that the true transformation did not depend on it. I couldn't change his choices, but I could change the way I dealt with the situation. Forgiveness wasn't for him, it was for me. And it was this perception that paved a healing path that I didn't even know existed. I needed to learn to rebuild myself, to look inside myself and understand how to get out of the pain and disappointment they were consuming me. No matter how much I'd been deceived, my faith was still the key that kept me going. Deep down, I knew that even in the darkness, there was a light, however small, that would guide me back to peace. I just needed to find that light within myself. I never imagined that something so devastating could happen in a relationship that I believed to be based on faith. With each passing day, I felt that our union strengthened, that God blessed us, but there, right in front of me, was the truth that I didn't want to see. The pain began to take care of me in such a deep way that I barely knew how to deal with her. One day, unexpectedly, while he was in the bathroom, his phone rang. I know I shouldn't, but something pulled me to look at the screen, and that's when my life turned upside down. It was a message from a woman, and there was, without any disguise, the confirmation of what I feared. He was cheating on me. The words on the screen were like a sharp blade, cutting my soul. I don't even know how to describe them, because at that moment, the whole world seemed to have stopped. I looked at those words and tried to find some explanation, but there was no. There were no excuses. There were no justifications that could erase the pain and disgust that invaded me. That moment was like a bomb, and everything I had believed so far began to dispose of before my eyes. I was looking at the phone, and what was happening in my mind seemed unrecognizable. How could he do this to me? How did someone who shared so many prayers, so many promises, could be cheating on me with someone else? The physical, emotional pain was so intense that I felt completely groundless. How could I have gone through all this without realizing it? Why didn't I see the signs earlier? I knew something was wrong, but the fear of seeing the truth made me ignore the details that were now so evident to me. And the most cruel of all was realizing that while he surrendered to someone else, I was by his side, doing what he loved most, reading the Bible. We prayed together every night. We asked God for protection, for a blessed marriage. And at that moment, the irony of the situation didn't escape me. I was there, by his side, doing everything right, while he was in a completely different place, living a lie. How could I not realize this? How could I keep believing that he was the man of faith he claimed to be? It was a pain that goes far beyond what words can express. I found myself completely disoriented, not knowing what to do, how to move on, how to look at the future after such a devastating discovery. Everything seemed so uncertain, so dark. I wondered if the faith I always believed still had any meaning, if there was still some purpose in all this. What happened to the promise we made before God? How could I look at that man and believe in his words again? I was divided between anger, sadness, and unbelief. Part of me wanted to scream, another wanted to escape. The pain of being betrayed was such a weight that I felt crushed by her. But at the same time, something inside me told me that I couldn't let it define me. I knew I couldn't change what he did, but what I did with this pain now was what really mattered. What I was left was to decide what I would do from that moment. If the pain was inevitable, the way I would deal with it would be the key to my recovery. And more importantly, it would be the key to understanding what God really wanted from me in the midst of all this confusion. The hardest, however, was to realize that the journey to healing would not be simple. I would have to face the truth head on, no matter how painful it was. The lie could not be ignored. The pain could not be swept under the rug. I needed to look honestly and bravely, and so I began to take my first steps toward a transformation, a change that I didn't even know it was possible. But the pain was just beginning, and the truth I didn't want to face yet needed to be revealed. When I finally confronted him, the reaction was the most anticipated, but still hit me as a punch in the stomach. He denied, of course, with all the words he could find. He said he was just distracted, that it meant nothing, which was unimportant. I wanted to believe, in fact, I needed to believe it. I wanted to believe in the man that, for so many years, I saw as my pillar, the man I promised to be, next door in health and illness, in joy and sadness. I couldn't imagine that someone capable of sharing my faith, to pray by my side every night, could be so different from what I believed. And it was in this silence that fear began to settle in a stronger way. I found myself in an emotional crossroads. On the one hand, there was the pain of betrayal, which I didn't know how to deal, and on the other, there was a desire to believe in his words, to believe in the love we shared. Deep down, I knew the truth was there, right in front of me, but the denial took over me, like a veil that I didn't want to get up. I wanted him to be who I thought he was, and that prevented me from seeing reality. This silence, this emptiness among us, was the worst part. I wanted to believe in his words, but at the same time, the pain of knowing what was happening behind the lies was running inside me. How did someone who said, "my mate," for so many years, could be hiding this truth? How? Who trusted him with his eyes closed, didn't realize the small changes, the distractions, the details that now seemed so evident? My mind and my heart were at war. I was trying to convince myself that maybe I was exaggerating, that he just needed a time, or that life was being difficult for him. And at the same time, I wondered if what I was feeling was just a consequence of fear, or if there was something deeper than I was ignoring. This state of denial lasted longer than I would like to admit. It was not only my heart that was in conflict, but my faith. I tried to find comfort in the words I always heard about forgiveness, about the importance of trusting God to restore what seemed to have broken. But I also knew I couldn't ignore what was going on. I couldn't live a lie. I could no longer allow my heart to get stuck in something that was no longer true. But the fear of what it meant, the fear of facing reality, paralyzed me. It was hard to admit, but at that moment, I was more focused on not losing the love I believed I had than actually needed to be revealed. This silence, this denial, was a reflection of my fear of accepting that the life I had built was actually crumbling. And I didn't know if I was prepared to see the ruin of everything I had believed, everything I had worked to build with him. Still, pain and doubt haunted me. Each time he looked at me, trying to convince myself of his innocence, I wanted to believe him, but something inside me knew that he had already crossed a line that could not be ignored. That's when I began to understand that, more than the lie he was living, the biggest lie was the one I was saying to myself, trying to convince my heart that things could be as before. But I knew deep down that confidence, once broken, would not be easy to restore. And as much as I wanted to believe that this was a phase, that he was just going through a crisis, and that we could overcome it together, I could no longer ignore what my heart already knew. He was cheating on me, and the pain of it was not something I could simply move away. Each day, the silence between us became more unbearable, heavier, and the more I tried to convince myself that the situation was not what it seemed, the more I felt that my soul was being torn by the truth not spoken. It was in this silence that I realized that, in order to move on, I needed to do something that until then seemed unthinkable to me, facing the truth head on, without further excuses, without further denials. I could no longer live in the illusion that things would go back to what they were, because deep down I knew this pain would not be overcome with empty words. I needed a new perspective, new mindset, to be able to deal with all this and find what was really in front of me. And in doing so, I would have to decide whether or not to follow by him, or if it was time to accept that my own journey needed to follow another way. The truth was there, as clear as the light of day, but I still needed to find the strength to face it, how to live with doubt, how to keep loving and trusting when, deep down, do you know you're being deceived. The betrayal was not just an act, but an internal struggle that consumed me every day. I felt a constant pain in my chest, a pain that seemed to have no end, like an open wound that did not heal. Every moment, the doubt eroded me. Is he being sincere now, or is it hiding another lie? The confidence I had in him, the confidence that was the basis of our relationship, had shattered, and yet I was there, still trying to justify, still trying to understand what had led him to do what he did. I wanted to believe that the pain was just a passing moment, a temporary storm that would soon pass. But what I didn't know was that the pain wasn't leaving. It was part of me, a constant shadow in my life. I kept wondering if it was still worth fighting for something that already seemed so broken, if it was still meaningful to keep loving someone who had hurt me that way. I wanted everything so much to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. I wanted so much to be able to return to those days when I believed that marriage was immune to difficulties, that faith would always protect us. But the reality was different. The pain was there, relentless, and with it came fear. The fear of losing everything I have always dreamed, the fear of not being the same, of not being able to forgive. How could you forgive something so big? I knew forgiveness was essential in the Christian faith, but how could I practice it when my soul was being destroyed by lies? I saw myself divided between the need to maintain my faith, to believe in forgiveness, and the anger I felt. How could you move on when looking at him, could I no longer see the man I trusted? How could you continue in this relationship when the truth, so painful, had proved before me? The inner struggle was like a fire that consumed me. On the one hand, I wanted to keep loving, believing that there could still be a chance of healing, restoring what we had. But on the other hand, the pain was so intense that it made me wonder if love, no matter how strong it was, could overcome the wound he caused. How to love someone who destroys you inside, even unintentionally. How to trust again when you know that confidence has already broken. It was a constant battle within me. I felt lost, not knowing which direction to take, not knowing if what was left of me would be enough to continue, and yet something in me still clinging to hope. I didn't want to lose my faith. I didn't want to lose the strong woman I knew still existed inside me. The fight was not just against him, but against my own emotions, against the pain that stifled me. I knew I needed to make difficult decisions, but how to make a decision when the heart is torn? How to find clarity amid the emotional chaos that took over me? I saw myself in the middle of a storm, not knowing if I was ready to get out of it. The pain taught me something I didn't expect to learn, that the real struggle was not just with him, but with myself. I needed to reconnect with who I was, with what I believed, with the woman who would not be defined by pain, but by my ability to raise me. It was a painful journey, but also a journey of transformation. I didn't know what the future reserved for me, but I knew that somehow I needed to find the strength to move on. It was in this search for clarity that I began to realize that healing would not come from immediate forgiveness or any expectation I had. The healing would come from the understanding that my journey was in my hands, and that if I chose, I could find a new way, even if the way were difficult and uncertain. The inner struggle was just beginning, but I knew I couldn't keep living in doubt. Something needed to change, and it depended on me. The truth I was looking for, the peace I wanted, was inside me, and the only way to find her would be facing the front pain, without further lies, without further denials. I, who was always very respected in my church, with my firm faith and my family always seen as an example, began to feel a pressure that I never imagined. When the truth began to get out of the scenes of our home and touch the hearts of the people around me, which I expected to be a support network, became a judgment field. Those words, thrown with distrust, laden looks, began to reach me relentlessly. "Didn't you realize, Sarah?" they said with a mixture of penalty and criticism. And every time I heard that, I felt a greater weight in my soul. What I feared most was to be judged not only by my husband, but by those I considered my community. The church, which was always a place of welcome, became a place where I felt isolated, in a loneliness that seemed overwhelming. It was as if, when betrayed by the one I loved, I was automatically guilty of something, as if the pain of betrayal were just the tip of the iceberg, and the rest of the load I carried were the weight of others' judgment. Instead of being received with compassion, I began to be seen as someone who failed, someone who could not protect his marriage, someone who might not have enough of what is expected from a Christian woman. I looked around and saw the other happy couples with their seemingly perfect relationships and thought, they don't know what's happening to me. They don't know what it's like to be placed at the center of such a cruel trial. I knew some of these people were just trying to help, but the way words were said, how the eyes became questioning, all this only worsened the feeling of abandonment that was already in my heart. I was no longer just dealing with the pain of betrayal, but also with the weight of being seen as guilty about something I didn't choose. The sense of loneliness intensified. I wondered, where are the people who should support me? Where are those who, in theory, would understand the pain of a woman who has been betrayed? The weeks and months passed, and I found myself farther and farther from everyone, even what I loved the most. The church, which should be a place of healing and welcoming, has become the stage of one of my greatest trials. I, who always believed that faith could overcome any obstacle, now see myself in an emotional crossroads. How to reconcile what I knew about God's mercy with the harshness of the eyes of others. How to find grace when the only thing I felt was judgment. Those brothers of faith, who should be my allies, were now the same ones who, instead of helping, pushed me deep into pain. I tried to support myself in prayer, seek comfort in the Word of God, but the feeling of being judged without mercy made me even more lost. I knew that most of these people didn't understand what I was going through, but the pain of not being understood became increasingly difficult to carry. Faith, which was once my fortress, now seemed distant to me, something almost unreachable. I didn't want anyone to look at me with pity or judge my choices, but at the same time, I knew that the words and attitudes of others affected me more than I would like to admit. I was divided between the desire to maintain my dignity, my inner peace, and the fear that, in exposing myself, my weakness would be visible to everyone. It was in this period of silence and judgment that I began to realize that, more than ever, I needed to learn to deal with my pain without depending on the approval of others. I needed to regain confidence in myself, and perhaps until I found a new way of understanding my faith. But that would not be easy. I knew that the external judgment, no matter how painful, could not be the only thing that defined my way. And while the weight of expectations and the silence of the church suffocated me, I knew something inside me was starting to change. I was beginning to understand that the healing journey could not depend on the look of others, but my own decision to move on, even if the road was full of stones. The church trial was just a part of everything I was facing, but I knew it could not be my starting point. The decision on how to continue would be mine, and she would start with the courage to face what was happening inside me. Before anything else, he was physically present, but emotionally distant, as if his body were there, but his soul were elsewhere. I didn't know exactly when it started, but I started to realize that something wasn't right. As if the Bible we read together every night were just a facade, something he did to maintain appearances, but he had no meaning for him anymore. Every word I read seemed to fall into the emptiness, as if my faith and devotion did not mean anything else for him. I saw myself in a whirlwind of emotions, trying to understand how it happened, how he could be by my side physically, but completely emotionally absent. The pain was so deep that I started to question everything, even my faith. I felt like being abandoned by him, God, and even by myself. As if, over all those years, I had given me so much, invested so much love and dedication, just to be set aside, ignored, by the person he loved most. I tried to understand why he was distancing himself. What had I done wrong? Was my faith failing? What had I not noticed? I saw myself lost, without answers, without the comfort of who should be my support, and worst of all was his silence. It was not just a silence of words, but of feelings, of actions. He didn't say what was happening. He didn't explain what was driving him away. He seemed to have no want to fight for us, for our relationship, for our family. And that silence, as much as I tried to ignore, was consuming me. There was no more flame in his eyes, nor the same affection in the words. He seemed to be absent, even when I was in the same room as me. I felt invisible, as if the love we once had been erased no more. It was at this moment of total emotional abandonment that I began to feel distant from God as well. I thought that if he was really there with me, he would have helped me to see the signs earlier, would give me the strength to deal with pain before it took such large proportions. I wondered why God allowed me to go through it. I knew my faith taught me to trust the divine plan, but in those moments of pain, it seemed impossible to see the purpose of all that. He felt that he had left me alone, letting me face the pain without a shoulder to support me. It was as if an invisible wall had been erected between us, me and him, me and my husband, me and hope. And in the midst of this emptiness, I began to feel like nothing else. I sought answers in prayers, but I felt like they fell into the emptiness. I wanted to hear from God that everything would look good, that He would guide me back to peace. But all I felt was a growing pain that made me doubt even my own ability to trust. How could you continue believing something or someone when I felt so alone and abandoned? I began to realize that the pain was not just about the betrayal itself, but from this lack of connection, this emotional absence of him, and this feeling that I was being left behind. I felt like I was living in a movie where all my feelings, all my emotions were being distorted, and I could no longer find the truth behind those empty words, that deafening silence. What I wanted, more than anything, was to be loved and cared for, but instead it was being set aside in a sea of doubt. And as if the emptiness in my relationship was not enough, the feeling of abandonment also came from an unexpected place. I felt distanced from God. How could I have reached this point? How did the faith that was always my greatest strength seem so far away, so fragile? I wondered what was happening to me. How could I move on without the comfort of my own faith and without the safety of a love that once seemed unbreakable? But despite all the pain, something inside me still wanted to fight. I knew that, as hard as it was, I needed to find a way to get out of that place of abandonment. I could not keep living in silence, in doubt, and in the pain that consumed me. Something inside me, even very fragile, still believed it was possible to rebuild. The answer was in myself, in my ability to face pain and to seek healing. I knew my journey was just beginning, but at the same time, I felt that I needed to take the first step to free me from that feeling of abandonment. I loved my husband. It never changed. I wanted, with all my strength, to fight for our marriage, for our family, for the life we had dreamed, to build together. Every promise we made before God, every word of support we said over the years, all this still echoed in my mind, challenging myself to continue. I wanted to believe that the love we shared could overcome any pain, any flaw. But at the same time, I felt betrayed, deeply despised. How could I keep trusting someone who was cheating on my back, while together we prayed for a better future, asking for blessings for our lives, our home, our union? How could you keep looking at the man I loved and feel the same confidence as before, when the truth about him seemed so distant and hidden? It was a constant battle within me. A part of me wanted to desperately save what was left, to do everything possible to recover what was lost. I wondered if it was still possible to restore our connection, if there was any chance to rebuild what was broken. But another part of me, that deeper part, felt such a sharp pain that it questioned if this was something that could be repaired. I felt that his lies had fell such a great hole in our relationship that there may be no more room to go back. And then, as a weight on my chest, the question arose, is it worth keeping trying? Was I just deceiving myself, believing that love could erase the pain, that confidence could be restored in some way? Or was I just trying to convince myself that he was still worth it, that it had not been in vain? Every time I looked at him, the love I felt mingled with a repressed anger that at the same time I did not know how to express. How to love someone who, deep down, disappointed you in such a deep way. How to fight for something that actually seemed to be crumbling with each attempt to reconstruction. The confusion of feelings was overwhelming. I saw myself divided between the desire to continue, to fight for our marriage, and the need to protect me, to put an end to that cycle of lies and disappointment. I wanted to understand how, with so much love and faith, I could be feeling like this, lost, disoriented, as if it had been deceived by God Himself. Where was justice? Where's the answer to the pain I was feeling? I tried to make sense of it all, but it seemed that the answers didn't come, and the questions multiplied. And as the weeks passed, I saw myself on an internal journey of attempt and error, trying to find out what I really wanted and needed. I didn't want to live in doubt. I didn't want to continue in a relationship that made me question who I was, who he was, and what was left of us. The confidence, which previously seemed unquestionable, was now cracked in 1,000 pieces, and the pain I felt seemed impossible to ignore. I knew the answer to all this would not come from outside, but from inside me, the courage to decide whether or not I could move on by Him. It was then that I began to realize that more than restoring the confidence in Him, I needed to restore confidence in myself. I needed to understand what I really wanted from my life, without being influenced by the expectations of others or the fear of being alone. I knew that to make any decision, I needed to stop losing myself in the confusion of feelings and start listening to what my heart was really saying. The love I felt for Him would not disappear overnight, but I needed to learn to deal with it in a healthy way. I could not continue living in a constant state of doubt and disappointment, and as hard as it was, I knew it was time to find an answer, a direction for my future. Faith, which has always been my anchor, became a two-edged knife. Something that once gave me strength and supported me now seemed to hurt me, making me vulnerable. With each prayer, I tried to cling to what He always strengthened me, but at the same time, I felt that my words were lost in the void. I prayed, but it seemed that my prayers were not being heard. Each night, on His knees beside the bed, I asked God to give me an answer, to give me some sign that He was still with me, that He still loved me. But instead of comfort, what I received was silence, a silence that seemed to suffocate me more and more. I asked God in my anguish, "How do you allow this? How do you let a man do this to your wife?" The pain of feeling betrayed and helpless mingled with anger, with frustration. I couldn't understand. I had been a good wife, a woman of faith. I trusted Him, believed He was in control of everything, but now when I needed it, when I most needed an answer, it seemed that He had left me alone, without support. Where was God's love in all this? How did He allow me to go through this, that I was left at the mercy of such a deep pain? These questions hammered in my mind, and as much as I tried to understand, but I felt lost. I had built my life and my marriage on faith in God, believing that He would protect our union, that He would guide our steps, that He would give us strength to overcome any obstacle. But the truth that was before me now seemed to contradict everything I believed. How could faith, which was the basis of everything we built, was the same one that now left me in pieces, questioning the existence of a greater purpose for all this pain? I saw myself in conflict with my own belief. On the one hand, there was a desire to continue believing, to support me on something that was always my refuge, the source of my strength. But on the other hand, there was a feeling that the faith itself was being a weight, a difficult burden to carry. I didn't know what to do with her anymore, how to move on when you feel that, as much as you call for help, God is not responding, how to keep confidence in something that, at that moment, seemed so far away. The conflict I lived was more than a struggle with the pain of betrayal. It was a struggle with the very foundation of my life, with everything I had believed. The pain was not only the man I loved, but also the silence of God, who didn't seem to hear me. I wondered, where is my faith now? How can I continue believing in a God who doesn't seem to care about what I'm going through? Each day it was a constant battle to find some kind of peace, some kind of answer. I saw myself as a divided woman, between the faith I believed I lost and the hope I still insisted on pulling me forward, though very fragile. But at the same time, something inside me still told me that there was something more. Even with all the pain, even with all the questions, I felt that the answer was not just what was happening around me, but how I chose to deal with it. I knew the journey would not be easy, but the only thing I left was to try to rebuild my confidence, not what I thought I should be, but what I could find within myself. And it was this clash, this search, which led me to realize that the true transformation would only happen when I began to accept that the answer would not come from outside, but from my heart. I was beginning to understand that as difficult as it was, I had the power to decide what I would do with my faith, my pain, and my life. And that decision, though fraught with uncertainty, would be the key to my rebuilding. I was beginning to understand that, as hard as it was, I had the power to decide what I would do with my faith, my pain, and my life. This decision, even full of uncertainty, was beginning to be the key to my reconstruction. I didn't know where this journey would take me, but something inside me said that by taking this step, something inside me would begin to change. I didn't know how strong I could become, but I knew I needed to try, because if I didn't try, the pain would consume me forever. Life no longer had the same color, and faith, which was once my light, now seemed a shadow over my shoulders. But the only thing left was to move on, even if I didn't know what would come. I share this with you, because if you have already felt that way, if this internal fight has resonated with something inside you, I know it is not alone. If this subject makes sense to you, and if you feel that your journey also goes through moments of confusion and fighting, share in the comments what has touched you the most. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Together, we can share our experiences, support each other, and grow in strength and faith, even when the road looks full of stones. I know this process is not easy, and maybe you are wondering, just like me, where faith comes, in when everything seems to crumble. But with every step I took, however small, I realized that the path of healing begins exactly when we decided to stop looking at the lies that were said to us and began to connect with the truth within us. What I was discovering in myself was that recovery does not depend on a ready response from God, but on my ability to get up and continue, even in the middle of pain. And even if the answers do not come immediately, there is a power in taking this first step of trust. Forgiveness, this word that everyone speaks, but is so difficult to practice. I saw myself trying to forgive, trying to convince myself that if I really loved my husband, I would be able to forgive him and move on. But the resentment was there, consuming me every day, with every memory, with every word he said. How could you forgive someone who had broken my confidence so deeply? How could it simply leave behind what he did, when all I wanted most was to understand why? I knew forgiveness was necessary, that it was an important step towards healing, but I didn't know how to take this step without feeling that I was giving up my own pain, without the wound to have a chance to heal. I wondered, is I'm just being foolish, trying to keep something that no longer exists? Can forgiveness really cure it? Or am I just fooling myself, trying to maintain a hope that is gone? The pain of being betrayed, of being ignored, being despised was so present that the simple act of forgiving seemed an impossible burden to carry. I didn't just want to forgive for forgiving. I wanted to understand. I wanted to feel that what he did was repaired in some way, that lost confidence could be regained. But the resentment was there, constantly remembering how everything had collapsed, and the anger, though masked, appeared in the little things. The pain seemed to be becoming part of who I was, and I didn't know if I could let it all go. I knew that, as hard as it was, forgiveness was essential for me to move on. But how to forgive without feeling that it was nullifying? How to take this step without seeming that I was allowing him to go unpunished, that the pain he caused me was ignored? I saw myself in an emotional crossroads, lost between the need to move on and the fear of being seen as weak or submissive. I didn't want to be seen as someone who accepted the betrayal, but at the same time, I knew that resentment and anger would not bring me peace. Forgiveness was not, for him, it was for me, and that was one of the greatest revelations I had during that time. I needed to free my soul from that pain so I could rebuild my life in some way, so that I could be the woman I wanted to be, no matter what he did. But even with this perception, the process of forgiving was still a battlefield. Forgiveness did not come easily. He came with tears, with clear nights, fears and insecurities that came up whenever I tried to look at him without the weight of what had happened. I didn't know if I was ready to trust again, not even if I should try. Each part of me said something different. One part told me to fight for marriage, for our family, while another part told me to move on, to get away from pain, to protect me. I didn't know which way to take, but one thing was certain. Forgiveness would not happen overnight, and I had to allow it to be a process, even if it was painful. I was trying to find the balance between being true to my own heart and being faithful to what I believed to be God's will. I knew that the choice to forgive did not mean forgetting. It did not mean that the wounds would disappear. But perhaps, only perhaps, forgiveness was the first step towards my true healing, to find peace within me. And in the meantime, I saw myself gradually starting to move away from the pain that consumed me. The process of forgiving was not linear, it was not simple, but I knew that somehow I needed to follow this path. I didn't know where he would take me. But I knew that the only way to break free from all that anguish was to accept forgiveness as part of my journey, not as an immediate solution, but as a conscious choice to allow me to start over. I spent months looking for answers inside me, trying to understand what had happened, because I was being tested that way. I sought answers everywhere, in friends' advice, in the words of shepherds, in the books on overcoming. But in the end, it was within God's word that I found what I needed most. I was so focused on pain that I hardly seen the answers that were already before me. It was during a quiet reading, in a moment of prayer, that a specific verse deeply touched my heart. He said, "I am the God of all grace, and my grace is sufficient." That phrase was like a blade cutting the fog that took over my mind. I didn't need all the answers to understand that God's grace would be enough to carry me on. It was there that, for the first time in months, something inside me began to calm down. The words of the verse seemed to have been written exactly to me at that moment. I didn't need complex explanations or to understand all the purpose of the pain I was living. What I needed was the strength to move on, to trust that, even in the middle of the storm, God was still by my side. The feeling of being completely alone, of finding no more sense at all, gave way to a silent certainty that in the midst of chaos, there was still a light, a presence of peace that I could seek. God's grace, His forgiveness, were not something I would conquer or deserve for being perfect, but they were a gift that I should accept, even in my weakness. I knew the walk would not be easy, that wounds would take time to heal, but at that moment, something broke inside me. I realized I didn't need to carry the weight of pain and resentment alone. The answer was to accept grace, to allow divine force to enter my heart and guide me, even when I didn't have all the answers. I began to understand that true overcoming would come when I allowed God's peace to take care of me, even without knowing how things would end. I was ready to move on, not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time I was willing to trust your will and direction. That was the beginning of a new phase on my journey, a journey in which I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I had something much bigger supporting me. During this time, I met other women who were going through the same pain, women who, like me, were betrayed and abandoned by men who swore to love them. They were there, with their own stories of suffering, and it was through them that I began to realize that I was not alone. Sometimes the sense of loneliness is so intense that it makes us believe that we are the only ones to face that pain, that no one else could understand what we are living. But by hearing the stories of these women, I began to understand that the pain of betrayal, abandonment, lies, is not unique. There are many of us who share this fight, and it gave me a kind of comfort. I began to realize that my pain was not a sign of weakness, but a part of the human experience that many of us have spent at some point in our lives. Their stories showed me that healing is possible, that although pain is deep, it does not define who we are. This made me understand that female solidarity, mutual support, can be one of our greatest strengths, and the connection we create with each other can help us rise again. The presence of these women was essential in helping me see that my healing journey didn't have to be experienced alone. That's when I understood that healing would not come to change, but I change. I found myself at a crossroads where I needed to make an important decision. Either I would remain stuck to pain, resentment, and desire for him to repent, or I would learn to break free from it. I couldn't control his choices, but I could control how I reacted. This was a powerful revelation. For so long, I had focused on trying to understand his reasons, looking for answers of something that would no longer make a difference, something that could not be changed. But at that moment, I realized that the only thing I could change was the way I dealt with my own pain. I was spending all my energy trying to change what was beyond my control, when the real power was in my ability to transform my own journey. And that's when I began to understand the power of forgiveness, not for him, but for myself. I needed to release my soul from this pain, this weight I carried. Forgiveness did not mean that I accepted what he had done or would forget everything that happened. It meant I was choosing not to let that event control my life forever. Forgiveness was a gift that I needed to give myself in order to move on. I knew that by losing him, I was not erasing my memory from what he did, but I was freeing me from the control he still had over my heart and my mind. I was starting to realize that healing was not about him, but about me. The decision to move on, to break free, to heal, was a choice I could only make for myself. I didn't want to get to that decision. Divorce seemed to be the last step, the last resort, something I hesitated to accept, as if it were a flaw, a defeat. But over time, I realized that for my emotional and spiritual health, it was what I needed to do. The pain of betrayal, emotional abandonment, all of this was corroding me. Inside, I was trying to look for the strength to continue, to maintain marriage, to fight for something that seemed to be getting out more and more. But deep down, I knew the only way to move on, to really start healing, would be to make that difficult decision. The truth is that at some point, we got to the point of realizing that what remains is no longer a marriage, but an emotional prison. I was sacrificing myself, emptying myself as he was there, physically present, but emotionally absent. Silence, denial, pain, all of this left me without strength. I wanted things to be as before, that he was the man I met, the man I loved, but it just didn't happen. And it was at this point, after so much suffering, that I realized that, for me to find peace, to rebuild myself, I needed to follow a new path. I knew this decision would bring judgments, faulty looks, perhaps even criticism, but I also knew I could no longer live a lie. I no longer wanted to live in fear of loneliness, with the weight of insecurity, what other people could think. The fear of being tried has become irrelevant in the face of the need to find inner peace. And even with the fear of taking this step, to face the reality of what was happening, I made the decision. I knew divorce was not the solution to everything, but it was the beginning of a new journey. And though painful, it was the only way that would allow me to find the healing and freedom I needed so much. I know that many of you are going through something similar, feeling the pain of betrayal, loss, abandonment. I want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, that you are not alone. Often pain can make us believe that we are the only ones to suffer, but the truth is that many women, in silence, are facing similar battles. Your pain has a purpose. It may be hard to see this now, but over time you will realize that God has something much larger prepared for you. Each tear, every fight, is a part of the process of transformation that it is operating in your life, even if you can't see it right away. If you are looking for healing, overcoming, meeting again after the pain, I want you to know that there is hope. Yes, no matter how deep you have fallen, there is always a way back to peace and recovery. Sometimes this path can be long and hard, but you have the strength within you to move on. If this story has touched your heart, leave your comment, share your experience, because together we are stronger. Mutual support, sharing. Our fights is what allows us to follow one step at a time. May God bless each of you, and remember, you are not alone on this journey. We are all here.